The silence had begun softly, almost unnoticed, like a friend who stopped writing letters one day and never resumed. At first, Margaret thought it was just a season. She had heard that word often in church, seasons of silence, seasons when faith was tested, when patience grew, but seasons were supposed to end. Years had passed now, and still there was nothing. No comfort in prayer, no warmth in worship, no whisper in her soul, just the quiet ticking of time. She still lit her small lamp each evening before she prayed, as she had done all her life. But lately, the light felt less like hope and more like memory, a ritual for something she no longer felt. "Lord," she whispered one night, her voice trembling, "I used to feel you. I used to hear you in the hymns, in the wind, in the quiet. But now, where are you?" Her words hung in the still air, unanswered. The silence that followed was so complete, it almost sounded like a reply. Her prayers had grown shorter over time. She once prayed like she was speaking to someone sitting beside her, unhurried, intimate. Now her prayers were half whispers, fragile, uncertain. "Thank you for the day," she would say softly, staring at the ceiling. "Be with me tomorrow if you're near." She didn't doubt that God existed. No, she believed he was real. She just no longer believed he remembered her. When she looked at the world, its noise, its pain, its endless motion, she thought, how could a God who holds galaxies still have time for me? She used to find comfort in Scripture, but even her Bible seemed quiet now. The verses she once clung to had lost their warmth. Still, she prayed, not out of habit but out of longing, because something deep within her refused to stop reaching upward, even when heaven seemed deaf. Her heart whispered what her lips couldn't. "Please, just let me know you haven't forgotten me." Morning light crept through her curtains like a visitor too polite to stay. Margaret would wake before dawn, as she always had. She'd make tea, set 2 cups out of habit, one for herself, one for no one. Then she'd sit at the window, watching the light unfold. Each sunrise was the same, calm, repetitive, distant. She used to see beauty in it. Now, it only reminded her of waiting. Sometimes she thought back to when her prayers felt alive, when she used to feel God in the rhythm of her day. Back then, even small things seemed like miracles. The laughter of her late husband, the kindness of a stranger, the warmth of morning light. Now the light only showed her what she had lost. She sipped her tea and whispered, "You used to meet me here." Her voice cracked. "Do you still?" But the sky stayed quiet, a pale blue silence stretching endlessly, carrying her question into nowhere. And yet, even in her disappointment, she looked again. Something in her refused to stop watching the dawn, as if her heart remembered what her eyes could not see. She never said it during the day. During daylight, faith came easier, surrounded by the simple routines of life, the sunlight on her plants, the gentle noise of neighbors downstairs. But at night, the question always returned. She would lie in bed, hands folded over her chest, eyes tracing the faint glow of the lamp on the wall. And then, softly, the question would slip out, "Lord, did you forget me?" She would wait afterward, holding her breath as if expecting a voice, a sign, a whisper, anything, but nothing ever came. She would turn onto her side, tears slipping silently down her cheek. It wasn't anger she felt, it was grief. The kind of grief that comes when love seems one-sided, when prayer feels like talking to a memory. "I still believe in you," she whispered once. "I just don't think you remember who I am." And yet, every time she said it, she felt something stir inside her, a flicker, faint but alive. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was proof of something even deeper than faith, hope that refused to die. Margaret's Bible sat on the table near the window, its leather soft, its corners frayed. The ribbon marker hadn't moved in weeks. Every morning she would open it anyway, not because she expected something new, but because she didn't know what else to do. Her eyes scanned the words, but they felt like echoes from another lifetime. The promises were still there, "I will never leave you nor forsake you," yet they seemed to belong to someone else. Someone God still spoke to. Sometimes she would rest her hand on the page instead of reading, whispering, "I know you're in there somewhere, Lord." I just can't feel you anymore." The wind outside would rustle the curtains, and she would close the book softly, almost reverently, like saying goodbye to a friend she still loved but no longer understood. Her heart ached for even a single word, a verse that would pierce the silence. But each time, there was only stillness. And though she didn't realize it, even in that quiet turning of pages, God was near, listening, waiting for her to stop searching for his voice long enough to feel his presence. There was a time when her faith had been fire. She remembered waking early to sing hymns while she cooked breakfast, her heart light, her prayers alive with certainty. She remembered kneeling beside her husband, praying for their children, praying for the sick, praying for blessings, and watching them come one by one. She had known the sweetness of miracles then, the feeling of praying and seeing heaven move. But now, those memories felt like photographs of someone else. That girl, that young woman who sang to God as if he were sitting in the room, was gone. Margaret still believed, but belief without warmth is a cold thing. She often wondered what had changed. Was it age or sorrow, or perhaps God himself quietly turning his face away? Sometimes she whispered through tears, "Did I do something wrong, Lord? Did I stop hearing you because you stopped speaking?" No answer came, but heaven was not ignoring her. Heaven was preparing her, because soon she would learn that the voice of God is not lost. It's often waiting behind silence. The loneliness of old age has its own language, a quiet so deep that even clocks seem to hesitate before ticking. Days passed without visitors, weeks without letters. Her children had their own lives, distant, busy, full. The neighbors waved politely but rarely stopped to talk. Even the phone, once her connection to the world, stayed still and silent. At first, she tried to fill the emptiness, knitting, reading, tending her small garden. But no hobby could cover the ache of being unseen. And the strangest part was this: she didn't only feel forgotten by people, she felt forgotten by God. "Do you still see me?" she whispered one evening, her voice breaking. "Do I still matter to you?" Her tears fell onto the arm of her chair. It was a small human sound in a room full of waiting, but if she could have seen what heaven saw, she would have known. Her every tear was being gathered. Her every whisper was being heard. And the silence that surrounded her was not abandonment, it was preparation for the voice that would soon break it. That night, she felt tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She sat at the window, the sky outside dark and endless. A single star blinked faintly, small, lonely, persistent. Margaret took her Bible and held it to her chest. "I've waited so long," she said softly. "I can't tell if you're testing me or if you've just gone quiet for good." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "I don't need you to speak, Lord. I just need to know you're still here." It was a strange prayer, not for answers, not even for hope, but for presence. She rested her head against the glass, eyes closed, breathing slowly. "Just stay," she whispered again, "even if you stay silent." Then she turned off her lamp and went to bed. Her last thought before sleep was not despair, but surrender, the quiet kind that lets go, not in defeat, but in trust. And in that surrender, heaven smiled, because she was finally still enough to hear what had been waiting all along. The house was wrapped in shadow. Even the clock seemed to move slower that night. Margaret lay still beneath the thin blanket, her eyes open, staring at the faint glow of moonlight on the wall. She had prayed until her words dissolved into sighs. There was nothing left to say, just stillness. The kind of stillness that presses against your heart, that makes you aware of every breath, every ache, every doubt. She thought of her life, the people she'd loved, the laughter that used to fill these same rooms, the long years that had come after. She had given all she could, and now all that remained was quiet. She exhaled slowly. "If this is all there is, Lord, let it be enough." Her eyes grew heavy, but her soul was awake, listening, reaching into the silence, still hoping for a whisper, even after all these years. Outside, dawn was waiting behind the horizon, holding something she couldn't yet imagine. Because before the voice of God speaks, the world always holds its breath. It was the faintest sound, not thunder, not dream, not imagination. At first, she thought it was the wind brushing through the curtains. But then, the air itself seemed to still, and a warmth filled the room, not on her skin but within her. Then she heard it, a voice, low, steady, tender. "I never left you." Margaret froze. Her breath caught mid-air. She didn't move. She didn't dare. The voice didn't come from outside, nor from memory. It came from somewhere deeper, from a place where her soul had always known his. She felt her heart beating hard beneath her hand. The silence she had feared for so long had just spoken, and it was love. Her eyes filled with tears. "Lord, is that you?" The warmth deepened, gentle and sure. There were no more words, only presence, unmistakable, alive, divine. And in that moment, the silence that had haunted her all those years turned holy. It wasn't a loud voice. It wasn't commanding. It was the kind of voice you don't hear with your ears. You feel it, like sunlight soaking into your heart. Margaret knew it instantly. She had read about that voice, sung about it, prayed to it, but hearing it now was different. It was like recognizing home after being lost for years. It spoke not in many words, but in being. Every breath in the room carried peace. Every shadow seemed to soften in its glow. She wept, not from sadness, but from recognition. This was the same Jesus who had walked with her in youth, who had listened to her early prayers, who had been silent, not in distance, but in patience. Now he was here, speaking again. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why after so long?" The voice within her heart seemed to smile. "Because you stopped asking for sound and started waiting for me." She pressed her hand to her chest and sobbed softly. Not out of pain, but release. She was not forgotten. She never had been. Then the voice spoke again. This time, only one word. Her name. Margaret. It was the same name she'd heard all her life, yet no one had ever spoken it like that. In his voice was everything she had ever needed to know. Tenderness, understanding, belonging. The syllables themselves seemed to carry her entire story, every loss, every prayer, every quiet act of faith. When he said her name, something within her broke open. It was as if every locked door in her soul had been flung wide, every ache touched by light. She covered her face with trembling hands, whispering, "You remember me." And the answer came without words, just a wave of warmth so deep it felt like heaven itself exhaled through her. Every tear she had cried, every night she had waited, every doubt she had carried, all of it melted in that one moment. Because when Jesus speaks your name, the silence finally makes sense. For a long time, Margaret couldn't move. The air itself felt different, thick with peace, alive with something she had not felt in decades. She sat up slowly, her frail hands shaking, tears streaming freely. But these tears were unlike the ones she had shed before. They didn't sting, they healed. Every inch of the room seemed touched by his presence. The old chair, the faded rug, the Bible on the table, all looked the same, yet somehow everything was new. She realized, through her tears, that she hadn't been waiting alone all this time. Every quiet morning, every prayer that fell into silence, every sigh that went unanswered, he had been there. Silent, yes, but never absent. "Lord," she whispered, her voice unsteady, "I thought you'd forgotten me." A warmth spread through her chest, and though no sound came this time, her heart heard it clearly. "I could never forget what I made with love." She pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel small beneath heaven. She felt held. As she sat there in awe, the voice returned, gentle, patient, full of love that didn't need to prove itself. "Your life is not small to me. You are not unseen." Every silence was me listening. The words seemed to come from within her, yet they filled the room like music. She began to weep again, but now each tear carried gratitude instead of grief. She had spent years thinking that her prayers had gone unheard. Now she realized it wasn't that God hadn't answered. He had simply answered differently, not with sound, but with presence. Not with noise, but with nearness. Her long wait hadn't been wasted. It had been preparation. The quiet work of grace teaching her to listen, not just to speak. Margaret bowed her head. "Thank you," she said softly, "for remembering me, for speaking again." And from somewhere deep within her soul came the reply, "My daughter, I never stopped." When she opened her eyes the next morning, everything felt new. The sunlight pouring through her window wasn't ordinary anymore. It wasn't just light, it was welcome. The same world that had felt so cold now shimmered with quiet meaning. The ticking clock, the smell of tea, the sound of birds outside, all of it seemed alive with a hidden message. "I am here." She smiled softly, letting her fingers trace the rim of her cup. "Good morning, Jesus," she whispered, like she was speaking to a dear friend. It didn't feel strange anymore. It felt true. For the first time in years, she no longer doubted whether heaven saw her. She didn't need more miracles. This light, this peace, was enough. She took a deep breath, and as she did, she felt it again. That steady presence inside her chest, like the rhythm of eternal love, keeping time with her own heartbeat. The silence had not ended. It had simply changed its voice. She hadn't sung in years. Her voice had grown thin. Her memory faded. But that morning, as she washed her teacup and opened her window, a melody rose unbidden from her heart. It began softly, almost trembling. "Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. The sound filled the small apartment, fragile yet full of life. As she sang, she felt her years melt away. The young girl who once believed, the woman who had wept through silence, the widow who thought she was forgotten, all of them were now one, singing to the same faithful God. When she reached the words, "Morning by morning, new mercies I see," she stopped, overcome with emotion. She looked at the sunlight spilling across the floor and smiled through tears. "Morning by morning," she whispered, "you were there. I just didn't see it." And from that moment on, her home was never silent again. Because once Jesus speaks to your heart, even the quiet hums with his presence. Margaret couldn't keep what she had received to herself. Her hands trembled with age, but her heart was steady with new purpose. She took a small stack of paper and began writing simple notes in her delicate handwriting. Nothing fancy, just words that had once saved her. "You are not forgotten. God still hears you. You are loved, more than you know." Every morning she would slip a few under the doors of her neighbors, most of them elderly, lonely, living quietly like she once had. No one knew who the notes came from, but soon people began to smile in the hallways again. They greeted each other softly, kindly. One woman told her, "Someone's been leaving these little miracles. Whoever it is, I think God sent them." Margaret only smiled and said, "He did." What had once been a heart full of silence had now become a voice of comfort. The same Jesus who had spoken to her in the dark was now speaking through her, quietly, gently, through ink and paper. It wasn't preaching, it was love, disguised as handwriting. Her days followed a simple rhythm, but now every moment glowed with sacredness. Each cup of tea was a thank you, each prayer a conversation, each sunrise a personal promise that he was still near. Margaret no longer rushed through her mornings. She moved slowly, savoring the peace that had replaced her old restlessness. She found God in the small things, in the soft hum of the kettle, in the warmth of her blanket, in the smile of a neighbor she used to ignore. And every time she opened her Bible, she didn't read out of duty anymore. She read because every word now sounded like his voice. Her life hadn't changed much on the outside. The same walls, the same chair, the same quiet streets. But inside, everything had been transfigured. The silence that once tormented her had become her temple. And each quiet act of kindness whispered the same truth back to heaven. "I still hear you, Lord, and I know you still hear me." That final evening came gently, like the closing of a familiar book. The air was cool, the moonlight pale. Margaret sat by her window, her Bible open to the Psalms, and whispered one last prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for not forgetting me." She closed her eyes. The peace in her chest was deeper than sleep. And then, just as her breathing softened, the room filled again with that warmth she had come to know so well. The same voice that had broken years of silence now returned, soft and steady. "I'm still here." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I know," she whispered back. Her last breath was not a sigh of sorrow. It was a reply. And as the clock ticked quietly in the background, her spirit slipped away, not into darkness, but into the same presence that had once whispered her name. When she opened her eyes, she was standing, strong again, light again, whole. The air was radiant, alive with sound, not noise but music, like the hum of creation itself. And there before her was the one she had waited for. Jesus smiled, stepping toward her with open arms. His eyes carried eternity, and within them she saw every moment of her waiting, every tear, every prayer that had seemed unanswered. He spoke softly, yet his words filled all of heaven. "I never stopped speaking your name." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but they sparkled like light. "I hear you now," she whispered. He touched her face with a tenderness beyond human love. "You always did," he said. "You just didn't know it." And in that instant, the silence of her lifetime was redeemed, turned into a symphony of love, unbroken and forever near. She had thought she was forgotten, but she was always his.